The ruined skyline of Thal Von 4 stretched across the horizon, jagged silhouettes of collapsed towers shrouded in the dust of war. Beneath the dim red glow of a dying sun, Sergeant Kara Voss lay motionless in the husk of an abandoned office complex, her rifle cradled in her arms like an extension of herself. The cracked window frame provided the perfect vantage point, overlooking the silent courtyard below. A light breeze rustled through the skeletal remains of the city, carrying the distant echo of artillery fire from battles fought miles away. She exhaled slowly, her finger resting alongside the trigger, not yet committing. Through the scope, she saw them, a convoy of sleek, black Imperial transports gliding into position. Armored troops fanned out, their movements crisp, efficient, a machine of war honed to perfection. And at the heart of that machine, stepping onto the cracked pavement with an air of calculated supremacy, was General Vikarn Solis. The target. Tall, imposing, draped in the deep blue and silver of the Zalari Imperial Command. He moved with an unnatural stillness, as if even the air around him bent in deference. His reptilian features were sharp, almost sculpted, his crimson eyes void of emotion. Kara had studied his file. Brilliant strategist, ruthless enforcer of the Empire's will, the architect of a dozen human colony massacres. She could end him. Right here. Right now. Her heartbeat steadied as she measured the distance, accounted for wind speed, and adjusted for atmospheric distortion. One clean shot through the skull would do it. The mission was simple: eliminate Solis before he could oversee the next planetary purge. Then she saw him. A figure in a hooded cloak stepped from the shadows beside Solis. Unlike the rigid formations of the surrounding troops, this one moved smoothly, fluidly, almost like a whisper given shape. The cloak swayed as the figure turned its head slightly, as if scanning for unseen threats. Even without a clear view of his face, Kara felt an undeniable presence emanating from him. Something was wrong. Her instincts screamed at her. This wasn't in the mission brief. There was no mention of another high-value target. No intelligence on a second figure worthy of standing beside a general of Solis's stature. Kara's grip on the rifle tightened. A mystery in the middle of an assassination meant risk, variables she couldn't control. She calculated the odds. The mission was already compromised by this unknown element. The logical choice was to wait, gather intel, and take the shot another day. But logic had no place in war. Her fingers squeezed the trigger. The rifle suppressor barely whispered as the round tore through the air, its trajectory flawless, aimed precisely between General Solis's eyes. And yet, in the instant before impact, the hooded figure moved. Not instinctively. Not in a reflexive flinch or a desperate attempt at survival. The movement was premeditated, impossibly precise. He turned his head just enough that the bullet did not strike Solis. Instead, it grazed the side of the figure's hood, tearing through fabric and exposing something beneath. Something metallic. The high-pitched clang of bullet meeting metal sent a chill down Kara's spine. For the first time in her career, she had missed a kill shot. No. That wasn't right. She hadn't missed. The target had avoided the bullet. Not dodged, not flinched, anticipated it. Her breath hitched as the realization set in. This wasn't an ordinary Imperial officer. He wasn't even something the Empire had classified as living. The hooded figure turned, tilting his head slightly, as if acknowledging her. Then, without hesitation, he raised his hand and pointed directly at her position. Kara's body moved before her mind had fully caught up. She abandoned the rifle, rolling backward just as a sniper round obliterated the window frame where her head had been a fraction of a second earlier. The Empire's counter-snipers had been waiting. Damn it. This was a trap. She landed on her feet and sprinted down the ruined hallway, her boots barely making a sound on the shattered tile. Behind her, another shot cracked through the air, striking where she had just been. They weren't just shooting at her location, they were predicting her movements. Her heart pounded as she vaulted over debris, weaving through the skeletal remains of cubicles and shattered walls. The Empire was not supposed to have counter-snipers this skilled. Not against humans. More gunfire. More near misses. She reached the stairwell, taking the steps 3 at a time as she descended into the bowels of the ruined complex. The moment she hit the ground floor, She sprinted through the broken lobby and out into the streets, melting into the wreckage of the war-torn city. Her camouflage system engaged, bending light around her as she disappeared into the ruins. She did not stop running until she reached the underground access tunnel where her evac was waiting. Inside the dimly lit safe house, the air was thick with tension. Kara sat on a crate, her mind replaying the impossible moment when the hooded figure had moved before the bullet had reached him. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Lieutenant Briggs muttered, tossing her a canteen. She caught it absently but didn't drink. "It wasn't a ghost," she said slowly. "It was something else." Briggs frowned. "You got the shot, right?" "No." She clenched her fists. Something interfered. Something not human. The silence in the room thickened. Colonel Rains entered then, his expression unreadable. "The Empire just broadcast a sector-wide alert. They're calling you a war criminal. Effective immediately, they're offering a bounty for your capture." Kara stiffened. "That's not standard protocol for a failed assassination." "No," Rains agreed. "It's not." Briggs exhaled sharply. "The Empire's afraid of you." Kara shook her head. "No, not me. Us." A moment passed before Rains finally spoke again, his voice low and deliberate. "There's something the Empire isn't telling us. Something they fear more than an assassin's bullet." Kara looked down at her hands, steady despite the storm raging inside her. The mission had changed. This was no longer about one kill. No longer just another job. This was bigger. And if the Empire feared her kind, then it was time to remind them. The steady hum of the underground bunker's generators filled the air, a dull mechanical heartbeat beneath the surface of Thalvon 4. The safe house was buried deep beneath the ruins, reinforced with layers of scrap metal and scavenged shielding. It was temporary, like everything in this war, but it would have to hold for now. Kara Voss sat at the edge of a rusted metal table, fingers steepled, eyes fixed on the flickering hollow display before her. It projected her face, tilted slightly downward, high cheekbones shadowed by the greenish hue of the wanted poster. The Imperial seal burned in the corner, a silent reminder that she was no longer just a soldier. She was prey. "They're calling you an assassin," Briggs said, pacing behind her. "The bounty's high enough to turn neutrals against us. Every merc, bounty hunter, and Imperial loyalist in this sector is going to come looking." "They don't put prices like that on snipers," Kara muttered. "Not unless they're afraid." Colonel Rains crossed his arms. His scarred face was unreadable, but there was tension in his posture, a quiet unease he couldn't quite hide. "They're not just afraid. They're desperate." The flickering hollow image changed, cycling through intercepted Imperial broadcasts, orders for planetary lockdowns, mobilization of fleet resources, and deployment of specialized hunter teams. Kara had taken shots at high-profile targets before, eliminated ranking officers, disrupted command structures. None of it had ever warranted this level of response. She leaned back, exhaling through her nose. "They want me erased." Briggs stopped pacing. "No. It's not just you." He hesitated before continuing. "It's us. Human women snipers." Kara's gaze snapped up. "What?" Rains activated a second projection. This time, it wasn't an alert or a bounty. It was old. A grainy, static-laced recording extracted from Imperial data archives. The file was locked behind layers of encryption, buried under centuries of classified reports. The feed crackled to life. A battlefield, cold and desolate, stretched across the screen. The architecture was unfamiliar. Tall, spire-like structures made of some polished black alloy, half destroyed by war. The scene was awash in gray, the sky thick with snow and smoke. The camera's perspective was shaky, as if the footage had been recorded from the helmet of a fleeing soldier. Shouts and screams echoed in the distance. Then the gunfire started. Not the wild, frantic spray of panicked troops, but precise, measured shots. One after another. Single, isolated bursts of sound. The soldier whose perspective the camera captured was running, panting, the rasp of his breath growing more desperate with every second. He turned a corner, ducking behind a collapsed wall. Around him, other Imperial troops were scrambling for cover. One lifted his head too high. A shot rang out. He fell. Another tried to retreat. Another shot. He crumpled. The camera shook violently, the soldier moving erratically now, fear infecting his every step. He turned again, and then the view locked onto a shape in the distance. A silhouette, half hidden in the falling snow. Unmoving. Watching. Another shot. The screen went dark. The bunker was silent. Kara felt something cold settle in her chest. That footage wasn't from this war. It wasn't even from this century. She straightened, fingers tightening against the table's edge. Where was this taken? A planet called Varkos, Rains said. 200 years ago. That doesn't make sense. Humanity hadn't even reached the Outer Empire 200 years ago. Rains nodded grimly. Exactly. Briggs stepped forward, arms folded. That footage, along with everything else we found, was buried under some of the highest-level security clearance I've ever seen. The Empire wasn't just hiding it. They were trying to erase it. Kara shook her head. That doesn't explain what I just saw. Briggs pulled up another file. This one was text-heavy, scrolling lines of outdated military reports and casualty assessments. Redacted names. Missing timestamps. Entire paragraphs blacked out. The Blood Tundra Massacre, Briggs said. That's what they called it. Kara's brow furrowed. I've never heard of it. No one has, Rains replied. Because the Empire made sure of that. Briggs gestured toward the data. According to these reports, an elite Zalari division was sent to Varkos to quell a rebellion. Standard Imperial procedure. They expected light resistance. A week at most before full planetary control. But something went wrong, Kara murmured. Very wrong. Rains tapped the screen, bringing up casualty figures. Within 3 days, the entire division was wiped out. No survivors. Kara's throat tightened. How? Briggs looked at her. Snipers. Her pulse quickened. Rains continued. Not just any snipers. Human women. A team of them. They dismantled the entire Imperial force piece by piece. No direct engagements. No wasted shots. One by one, officers and commanders were eliminated. Logistics collapsed. Morale disintegrated. By the time reinforcements arrived, it was already over. Kara tried to process the information. But that's impossible. There were no human colonies in the Empire back then. We didn't have access to their war fronts. Unless, Briggs said slowly, there was something the Empire never told us. Silence stretched between them. Kara turned her gaze back to the frozen image on the display, the lone silhouette in the snow. The calm. The stillness. The certainty of the kill. Something about it felt familiar. She had seen that kind of precision before. In herself. Rains exhaled sharply. Here's what we do know. The Empire fears human women snipers because, at some point in their history, they faced them before. And they lost. Kara clenched her jaw. And now they're afraid it's happening again. Rains gave a slow nod. They don't just want you dead, Kara. They want you erased. Like those women. Like Varkos. The weight of it settled on her shoulders, heavy and cold. She had spent her entire life believing she was fighting a new war, a battle for survival in a galaxy that saw humanity as little more than an inconvenience. But this war wasn't new. It had happened before. And the Empire was terrified of history repeating itself. Briggs pulled up one last file. There's something else. The hooded figure you saw with Solus? We think we know what he is. Kara's fingers curled into a fist. Go on. Briggs hesitated, then brought up a detailed schematic. The image was blurry, fragmented, but recognizable. A body. Not organic. Not entirely machine. A fusion of both. The Empire's been experimenting, he said. For decades, maybe longer. If they've been trying to counter human snipers, what better way than to create their own? Kara studied the data. The metallic plating where the bullet had struck. The skeletal structure reinforced with non-human alloys. The neural pathways artificially enhanced. It wasn't just a soldier. It was something designed. Her stomach twisted. The Empire hadn't just remembered the snipers of Varkos. They had been trying to replace them. Briggs' voice was quiet. They built a ghost. Kara inhaled sharply. It all made sense now. The classified reports, the desperate attempt to hunt her down, the impossible way the hooded figure had moved. The Empire wasn't fighting her. They were fighting the idea of her. Her hands steadied as she pushed herself to her feet, the storm inside her mind coalescing into something clear, something sharp. If the Empire thought they could erase her kind, if they thought they could bury the past and build a future without the fear of human snipers haunting them, they were wrong. She met Rain's gaze. "We need to move." He nodded. "Where?" Kara's lips curled into something cold, something almost like a smile. "To the one place the Empire doesn't want us to go." For the first time since she pulled that trigger, she felt no doubt. Only certainty. They were going to Varkos. The Vanguard tore through the void, its dark hull blending seamlessly with the endless sprawl of stars. A relic of an older war, the Corvette-class stealth ship had seen better days. Patched plating, overclocked engines, and a cloaking system that flickered unpredictably. But it was fast, and right now, speed was all that mattered. Kara Voss stood at the edge of the command deck, arms crossed as she watched the blue glow of the ship's ion trail dissipate into nothingness. Somewhere behind them, the Empire was searching. Hunting. Briggs adjusted the controls from the pilot's chair, his fingers moving over the console with precise efficiency. "We'll reach the Varkos system in 16 hours, he said. "Assuming we don't get intercepted." Kara didn't turn. "They won't catch us." "Not yet," Rains muttered from the other side of the room. He was hunched over the tactical display, watching a real-time map of Imperial fleet movements. Red markers pulsed across the grid, spreading outward in a systematic sweep. "They're widening their search pattern. If we're not careful, they'll cut us off before we reach the outer rim." Kara studied the screen. The Empire was being methodical. Too methodical. They weren't just reacting to her escape from Thalvon 4. They had been preparing for something like this. "They know where we're going," she murmured. Briggs frowned. "How?" "We just decrypted the Varkos files yesterday. There's no way." "They didn't need to know," Rains said grimly. "They just had to anticipate. We triggered something when we accessed those records. The moment we uncovered the truth, they moved." Kara exhaled slowly. "They're trying to erase Varkos again." The thought settled like a weight in her chest. If the Empire had spent centuries burying the massacre, rewriting history to remove the snipers who had once brought them to their knees, then it made sense that they would never allow anyone to return to that place. Not even them. Especially not them. Briggs' fingers tightened around the flight controls. "We're not turning back." "Never said we should," Kara said. "But we need to assume they have a kill team waiting for us." Rains straightened. "They won't make the same mistake twice." "They won't need to," Kara said, shifting her gaze to the tactical display. "They're not just sending soldiers this time." Silence filled the cabin. No one spoke the name aloud, but they were all thinking it. The hooded figure. The thing that had moved faster than her bullet. Briggs broke the silence first. "If that thing is waiting for us, how do we fight it?" Kara met his gaze. "We don't." Briggs' brow furrowed. "That's a hell of a strategy." Kara stepped forward, her gloved hands resting against the edge of the console. "It's not a fight if you don't play by their rules." Rains nodded slowly. "A sniper's war." Kara allowed herself the barest hint of a smile. "Exactly. They weren't going to fight the Empire's creation head-on. That would be suicide." The Empire had spent decades, maybe centuries, perfecting whatever the hooded figure was. But wars weren't won by brute force alone. Wars were won by patience. By precision. By one perfect shot. The ship shuddered slightly as it entered another jump, stars stretching into elongated streams of light before collapsing back into darkness. Briggs glanced at the sensor readout. No pursuit yet. They'll come, Kara said. They always do. The wreckage of Varkos hung in the void like a scar on the face of the galaxy. From orbit, the planet was little more than a desolate husk, gray wastelands stretching from pole to pole, vast canyons carved by ancient bombardments, and deep, jagged scars where cities had once stood. No settlements. No signs of life. Only silence. Briggs let out a low whistle as he guided the Vanguard into a controlled descent. Hell of a welcome. Rains scanned the readout. No active defenses. No transmissions. If the Empire left anything behind, it's either dead or buried. Kara stared out at the surface as they broke through the atmosphere. They wouldn't leave it unguarded. Briggs tensed. Then where the hell is their fleet? It was a good question. If the Empire had been desperate to keep people away from Varkos, then why wasn't the sky crawling with warships? The Vanguard touched down on a plateau overlooking what had once been a battlefield. Kara felt at the moment she stepped out onto the frozen ground, the weight of history pressing down on her, cold and unrelenting. The wind howled through the ruins, carrying whispers of a war long forgotten. Briggs adjusted his rifle strap. So where do we start? Kara scanned the terrain. She knew what she was looking for, even if she couldn't put it into words. The past was buried here, waiting to be uncovered. Then she saw it. Half buried beneath layers of ice and ash, the skeletal remains of an old command bunker jutted from the earth like a broken ribcage. The entrance was collapsed, but that wouldn't stop them. This way. Briggs and Rains followed without question. They moved swiftly, weapons at the ready. The Empire's silence was a trap, but they would not be the ones to spring it. Inside the ruins, the air was stale, thick with the scent of decay and frozen metal. Kara moved carefully, stepping over shattered consoles and rusted weapon fragments. She ran her fingers along the walls, feeling the grooves and etchings beneath the layers of ice. Then she found it. A symbol. Faint, nearly erased by time, but still there. A sniper's insignia. Human. Kara traced it with her gloved fingers, a ghost of recognition stirring in her mind. These weren't just rebels. They weren't just survivors. They had been something more. Briggs knelt beside a frozen data terminal, brushing away the ice. Think this thing still works? Rains crouched beside him, pulling a portable power supply from his pack. We'll find out. Kara kept watch as they worked, scanning the dark corridors beyond. Every instinct told her they weren't alone. The Empire had been here, and something else still was. The terminal flickered to life with a distorted hum. Static-laced text scrolled across the screen. Most of it was corrupted, fragmented beyond repair. But then, a single phrase emerged. A name. A designation. Project Revenant. Kara exhaled slowly. They weren't just hunting snipers. Briggs glanced at her. What are you saying? She turned away from the screen, eyes narrowing as the weight of the truth settled over her. The Empire didn't just fear the snipers of Varkos. She stepped toward the bunker's entrance, peering out into the frozen wasteland. They tried to become them. And somewhere, out in the void, the hooded figure was watching. Waiting. The hunt had already begun. The storm had rolled in fast, swallowing the sky in a swirling mass of ice and shadow. Wind howled through the skeletal remains of the bunker, dragging coils of frost through the open corridors. The ruins of Varkos had been silent when they arrived. Now, the silence was gone. Kara Voss lay prone atop a fractured slab of reinforced steel, her rifle pressed against her shoulder, the scope's reticle cutting through the blizzard like a razor. Through the lens, the battlefield stretched before her, a graveyard of forgotten war machines, half-buried bodies, and the echoes of something far older than the Empire's fear. She wasn't alone. She could feel him. Somewhere in the ruins, the hooded figure moved unseen, methodical, patient. A hunter who knew his prey. Briggs adjusted his position a few meters behind her, setting up his own sightlines. Nothing on infrared. he muttered. Whatever this thing is, it doesn't register like anything I've seen. Rains crouched lower behind the cover of a collapsed wall. That's because it isn't alive. Kara tightened her grip on the trigger. Doesn't mean it can't be killed. The wind shifted, just slightly. A whisper of movement. A disturbance in the snow. Kara's pulse slowed, her breathing measured, fingers steady. A flicker. A ripple of motion, almost imperceptible. The hooded figure was a ghost, its silhouette barely visible through the storm. It moved unlike any living thing, fluid, weightless, its steps leaving no imprint in the ice. The cloak billowed as it shifted, the glint of metal catching the faintest sliver of light beneath the hood. Not a soldier. Not a man. A creation. A weapon built to erase her. Kara exhaled, centered herself, and adjusted her aim. A shot wasn't just about pulling the trigger. It was about control. Anticipation. She had to know when, not just where. Then it moved. Faster than it should have. Kara fired. The bullet tore through the air, slicing through the storm in a perfect arc. But the figure twisted at the last second, shifting impossibly, the round barely grazing its shoulder. No blood. No stumble. Just motion. Then it was gone. Briggs swore. That's not natural. Rain's jaw tightened. It's adapting. Kara reloaded in a single practiced motion, scanning the ruins. It wants me to take the next shot. Briggs frowned. You're saying it's baiting you? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. She knew. The Empire had tried to erase the snipers of Varkos. Tried to replace them. Recreate them. But war wasn't about calculations, about perfect movement patterns and predictive models. War was human, it was instinct. It was chaos. And that was something no machine could ever truly master. The storm thickened, ice stinging against her exposed skin. She adjusted her breathing. She wouldn't take the next shot. She would wait. The wind carried a whisper of movement again, this time closer. Kara didn't turn, didn't react. Let it believe she hadn't noticed. Let it think it was the predator. The weight of her rifle was familiar, steady against her hands. She counted the seconds in her head. 5, 4, 3. The air shifted. She rolled. The figure lunged from the shadows, a blur of steel and dark fabric, but Kara had already moved. She fired mid-roll, the shot cutting through the edge of its hood. Sparks flew where the bullet scraped metal. The hood fell away, and she saw its face. Not a face. A skull of burnished metal, reinforced plating beneath a thin layer of synthetic flesh. Human in design, but hollow. Empty. Its eyes, if they could be called that, were artificial lenses, glowing with something cold, something calculated. Project Revenant. A mockery of the ghosts the Empire feared. Briggs fired from his position, but the figure moved too fast, ducking low and weaving between the debris. Kara hit the ground, rolling into cover as another shot missed its mark. Rain shouted, "We need to box it in." Kara didn't answer. She was already moving. She sprinted through the ruins, keeping low, using the wind and ice to mask her steps. The figure pursued, relentless, silent. It didn't breathe. It didn't falter. But it anticipated. It didn't need to see her. It was tracking her movements, calculating probabilities, learning with each step. She couldn't outrun it. But she could outthink it. She veered left suddenly, sliding into the wreckage of a downed Imperial walker. Its hollowed-out frame provided just enough cover. She crouched low, pressed against the cold metal, listening. Waiting. Then, ever so faintly, the sound of shifting snow. It had followed. Right where she wanted it. Kara moved fast. Spun out from cover, rifle raised, but she didn't fire. Not yet. The figure was mid-step, adjusting, calculating, its next movement. And for the briefest moment, just one fraction of a second, it hesitated. That was all she needed. Her shot rang out. This time, the bullet struck home. Right through the left eye socket. The figure staggered, its momentum breaking. Sparks erupted from the impact point, a shower of light against the storm's darkness. The thing, whatever was left of it, twitched, its movements jerking unnaturally. Its balance faltered. Then it collapsed. A faint, flickering glow pulsed from within its skull, its remaining eye dimming. Its fingers twitched once, as if trying to process its own failure. Then, finally, stillness. The wind carried the silence in its wake. Briggs approached cautiously, rifle still raised. "Is it dead?" Kara exhaled. It was never alive. Rains knelt beside the remains, scanning the shattered plating. The Empire didn't just make a sniper. His voice was quiet. They made a weapon to erase what snipers stood for. Kara studied the lifeless husk before her. A machine built to mimic her kind. To counter them. To replace them. And yet, it had failed. Because war wasn't about perfect calculations. It was about the one thing no machine could ever replicate. Instinct. Briggs let out a slow breath. So what now? Kara slung her rifle over her shoulder, gaze still fixed on the broken machine. Now. She turned toward the distant horizon, where the ruins of Varkos stretched endlessly beneath the storm. Now we finish what they tried to erase. Because if the Empire feared the ghosts of the past, then it was time to remind them.